Hello, world. I'm Chris Myceny, aka Mr. FLIXTER, and I'm here to talk motion pictures. Mr. FLIXTER. For this week's episode, I'm going to take a look back into the past and talk about one of my all-time favorite slasher movies in anticipation for the new Scream film. I thought I'd review all four, starting with the original today. It's gonna be a Scream, baby! Sorry, I had to. So in case you haven't seen Scream 1996 before, I'm gonna dive into details on this one. So consider this your spoiler warning. Knock, knock. Who's there? Spoiler warning. Spoiler warning. Who? Spoiler warning for you. So if this is your first time seeing the show, I base my reviews off 6 criteria: writing, directing, acting, entertainment value, rewatchability factor, and genre aspects. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. If this is your first time watching my channel, I'm a film critic for HorrorBuzz.com. Being the horror enthusiast that I am, I love a good slasher. It's my personal favorite subgenre. The original Scream has spawned 4 sequels, a Netflix show, which honestly I'm not really a fan of, I couldn't get into it, but to each their own, and countless ripoffs. And because of those things, the franchise has had a long-lasting impression on pop culture. What Wes Craven managed to accomplish was take the slasher and have it more grounded in reality. And then the writer, Kevin Williamson, he begged the question, what if someone's fascination with horror movies went way too far? Good question. I just find the concept so terrifying because it's so realistic. Something like that could actually happen. One of the things that sets this franchise apart from other major horror movie franchises is the murder mystery aspect of it all. Going into it, you don't know who the killer is, unlike Jason or Freddy Krueger or Leatherface or Chucky, other slashers that came before. After this movie came out, people started to take slashers seriously again. Instead of feeling like cheap films that had no emotion, with one-dimensional characters, there was an entire cast full of well-developed characters that were lovable, they were relatable, and more importantly, they were memorable. Wes Craven also brought a maturity to the subgenre, made people look at horror differently at the time. Slashers were kind of frowned upon because they were cheap to make, and a lot of them didn't get theatrical releases. So when this one was about to come out, everyone just kind of rolled their eyes until they watched it. The opening scene, it's the most memorable scene in the whole franchise. When I say the word Scream, I bet the first thing that pops into your head is Casey Becker answering the phone. You just pictured it, didn't you? Even Bella agrees with me. Wes Craven does such a good job with subtle things in that opening sequence, like popcorn being a plot device. Just a little thing in the background that causes all the smoke and eventually causes the fire. Or the fact that you're always looking in the background to see if you can spot Ghostface running around back there. And the performance by Drew Barrymore is just fantastic. She plays both the scared teenage girl, but she's also level-headed enough to try and navigate her way outside and try to get away from the killer. But unfortunately, as you know, she doesn't make it. And that was shocking the first time that I saw that, because I thought she was going to be the main star of the film. I mean, that's what all the previews made it look like. She's even on the poster. But that in itself is an homage to Psycho, in the same way that Janet Leigh was headlined to be the star of that one, and she gets quickly killed off too. Craven shows restraint by using atmosphere to induce fear. He combines the lighting with the smoke, and then you have the fire, and then you have the panic from Casey trying to answer all these questions about these different movies that she's clearly a fan of, because she states outright she's seen, I think it was Friday the 13th, at least 20 times. So they're all pretty horror savvy. That kind of broke the rules a little bit. Usually in movies like this, you're like, haven't you seen these movies? Like, you know what happens when you go down dark hallways or upstairs or just something silly like that. And I love that. And the pacing for that first scene makes it even more suspenseful too. It's not a very long sequence. It's only about 10 minutes or so. But it is an incredible 10 minutes. Even the fact that Casey almost gets away and she misses their parents by that much was so heartbreaking. And it made her death even that much more impactful, which says a lot about the performance and the way the scene was written and the way that scene was directed. We really cared about Casey, even though we didn't really get to know her for very long. Another thing I love about this scene is how the gore is brutal, but it's not over the top. Wes Craven doesn't rely on gore like that. He'd rather build suspense other ways, like the ones I mentioned. Like when each time the phone rings, there's that tension right before Casey picks it up, because you know who's going to be on the other line, but it's all a matter of how's this going to play out. Kevin Williamson delivers a well-crafted script with a lot of different subtle clues and hints that demand repeat viewings. It's always a plus when you watch a movie again and then you notice something that you didn't notice before. That just shows how much thought was actually put into it. The entire cast does a phenomenal job of bringing his characters to life. I gotta start off by talking about Roger Jackson. He provides the iconic voice of the Ghostface Killer. While you might not recognize his face, you know his voice. He's got that iconic, seductive voice that draws you into the conversation. And just like that, he can turn on you and become your worst nightmare. Every time an unsuspecting victim answers the phone, he steals the show by just drawing you into the conversation. A lot of times, too, it's not so much what he says, it's how he says it. With iconic lines like, "Do you like scary movies?" Or, "What's your favorite scary movie?" He just has one of those instantly recognizable voices. Fun fact, Roger Jackson was also the voice of Mojo Jojo on Powerpuff Girls. Matthew Lillard gives one of the best performances in the whole movie as Stu Macher. He's one of those goofball type friends that you wouldn't really suspect to be the killer the first time you watch it. And when he finally flips in that big reveal, his performance is just so over the top and so hilarious. It just works on so many levels. And again, there's just so many quotable lines. I'm not sure if they were written by Williamson or if he improvised or if it was a mix of both, but it works. This is easily one of Matthew Lillard's best performances. Not just in this film, in his whole career. It's just too bad he never came back for any sequels. But again, I haven't seen Scream 5, so I don't know if he's in that one or not. Skeet Ulrich plays Billy Loomis. Going back to the references again, and subtle details, Loomis is a horror name made famous in both Halloween and Psycho, and carried on tradition here by using the name. So the movie tries to play with you on whether or not he did it. But when it's finally revealed that he's the other killer, his performance is so sinister, so diabolically evil, that you can just really buy that it was him all along. And that's another thing too. Having two killers was pretty unheard of at the time. He's really good at playing innocent until that final flip. When he quotes Psycho, when he says, "We all go a little mad sometimes." I think that's another reference. Nev Campbell plays Sidney Prescott. We learned through news reports that a year prior to Casey's murder, that her mother was brutally murdered too. So that adds a layer to her character that a lot of final girls don't have in other movies. Because not only is she dealing with a psychotic serial killer, she's also dealing with the grief of the loss of her mother, which I thought is really interesting, because you didn't really see it before. The character of Sydney is more than just a damsel in distress. She's very intelligent, and she knows what she's getting herself into, and she's seen all the movies before, and she's actually not a fan of horror movies, unlike most of her friends, which I think was hilarious. That was a good writing choice. Campbell does a good job of playing both innocent and fragile, but also strong and independent at the same time. So it's a nice balance, and it's a nice contrast. She's not just one-sided. A lot of these movies just have stupid people getting into stupid situations that can easily be avoided. And I love the scene when she makes fun of girls that run upstairs instead of going outside the front door. And then she literally does it like 2 minutes later. That's what I mean. This movie just goes for it. It presents the rules of horror, and then practically immediately it just subverts them. Like how Sydney wasn't a virgin, but she still survived. Most final girls are virgins. Courtney Cox plays Gail Weathers, who's a ruthless reporter who also wrote a book about the incident involving Sydney's mom. But just like Sydney, she's not just some one-dimensional character. She actually has a pretty good story arc showing how she actually cares about what's going on with the situation, because she thinks that Sydney accused the wrong guy, Cotton Weary. She thinks someone else did it. And as it turns out, she was right all along. I love the character development when she starts off one way, and then by the end of the movie, she's almost a different person, because her goals change. That goes back to good writing. But Courtney Cox deserves credit for bringing the character to life. David Arquette plays Deputy Dewey. He's the bumbling new cop who does his best to try and help his sister's best friend. His sister being Tatum, and best friend, of course, being Sydney. He actually has a good heart, and even though things don't always go as planned, he's always trying to find a new remedy or a new solution to try and catch that killer. And even though he's not always the best cop, he's not one of those traditional cliched useless cops. There's just something about a character that's a screw up that you just want to see succeed. He has good chemistry with the rest of the cast too, and I can't really imagine anyone else in the role. But then again, I could say that for the entire cast of this film. I can't imagine anyone else being in any of these roles. But he gives a good performance too, respectively. Jamie Kennedy plays Randy, who's basically the embodiment of every horror fanboy. That's who he represents. He represents you, the fan. The one who's seen the movies, the one who knows who's going on. He's the one who establishes all the rules in the first place. He's written as the comic relief, but he gives a memorable performance. There's a lot of the quotable lines. The comedy in this film actually comes from him. More of a side character, he doesn't have a whole lot of character development. He's still a crucial character in everything that's going on. Also one of the first ones who starts trying to figure things out. Rose McGowan plays Sydney's best friend, Tatum. Here's another character that's more of a side character, but she's a comic relief, and she is funny. A lot of those quotable lines, like I said before, like, Deputy Dewey boy, and please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel. I can't even say it without laughing. And sure, her death scene might have been silly in the garage. I never really understood her death. Like, the mechanics of it, how it even killed her at all. Her death was very impactful. Like, when she gets killed, I felt something. You know that feeling when a character dies And you're like, oh, not her. Yeah, that is Tatum. She doesn't have a whole lot of character development, but she's Sydney's rock throughout the whole movie, up until her untimely death at the party. And that was one I wasn't really expecting, which just goes to show that no one is really safe in these movies. So between Randy, Stu, and Tatum, that is where most of the comedy comes from in this film, which is a good balance between the humor and the horror. It not only pokes fun at horror movies, but it's a legitimate horror movie in its own right. Now, I watched this recently so that I could write this in order to shoot this video. And it's amazing, all those little subtle details that I got into a little bit before, but I'm going to go more in depth here. These are things that I just didn't notice before. And you wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. You know what I mean? Like that scene by the fountain the day after Casey's murder. The little things, like the looks that Billy gives Stu when he's talking about gutting somebody. Or even the way he says things to Stu, like, hey, shut up. The little exchange they have back and forth, the body language. Very interesting. Or even that scene in the video store when Randy's trying to figure out who the killer is and he starts throwing out those accusations of the way they conduct themselves. It seems very suspicious. Once you've seen the movie before, of course. And I gotta say, that scene when Jamie Kennedy is on the couch and he's watching Halloween, telling Jamie Lee Curtis to look behind her while Ghostface is behind him. And then it has Sydney and Kenny, the cameraman, and they're telling Jamie Kennedy to look behind him. That has got to be one of the most meta scenes ever filmed. It's like looking at yourself in a mirror, but you're looking at yourself through another mirror. Even the way that final scene at the party is edited, the way it's cut between what's going on at the party and what's going on in the movie Halloween when they're watching it, it shows a lot of parallels that a lot of slashers share. Even the fact that they have just a group of people sitting around getting drunk watching horror movies. It's showing us watching us. It's art representing life, representing art. That's pretty inventive filmmaking if you ask me. Now, we get to that iconic song, Red Right Hand, which has become the unofficial theme song of the Scream franchise, and it started with the first film. Even though you might not recognize the name of the song, when you hear the song, you know that song. I'm not going to play a clip of that because copyright laws. I don't want my video to get claimed or anything like that. But if you've seen the movie, you know the song. The title of Red Right Hand was actually taken from John Milton's epic poem, Paradise Lost. It comes from when Belial the demon refers to God's red right hand, which he says will strike vengeance down on the devil. If you listen closely to the lyrics of the song, there's a lot of links between them and the story itself. The song talks about a tall, handsome man who's in a dusty black coat who arrives during a gathering storm. I think in many ways this represents Billy because of how the story plays out. He tries to play the cool, handsome man, but then when he flips and you find out he's one of the killers, you can see how much vengeance he really has in his heart. So, to sum things up, because I could talk about this movie all day. I'm not kidding. This film is mostly why I love slashers so much. They took a realistic, grounded premise. They took all the rules of the horror movies. And then they both make a funny satire about the horror subgenre and a legitimate horror movie in their own right. Not only do I recommend this if you haven't seen this before, but I think it's quintessential viewing for anyone who loves horror movies. Not only that, but the other 4 movies are annual Halloween watches when the season comes. This film is brilliantly written. It's ingeniously directed, and it's full of top-notch performances, with a lot of memorable, lovable, relatable characters. It completely reinvented what a slasher could be, revitalized the entire subgenre in the process. And it's not hyperbole to say that Scream has changed my life. I was a writer before, but this inspired me to write horror stories, and I started turning them in as assignments for class for school. And long story short, it actually got me in trouble because they were graphically violent, and none of my stories had happy endings. Needless to say, my teacher grew concerned. So, I wrote a review on Facebook, and I gave it an A++ on there. I just can't oversell this movie. Even Elsa agrees with me. So this concludes my spoiler review of the original Scream. Please keep in mind, this is only my opinion. It's okay to disagree with me, and it's okay to agree to disagree. Just have some class about it. Check me out on the Horror Buzz Live channel. I left a link in the description below. I also write my reviews and put them on Facebook. I'll put that description down there too. You have to join the group to read the review, but go ahead and do that. Why not if you love reading movie reviews? I have plenty there. And don't forget to check out my reviews on horrorbuzz.com for all things horror. I'll leave links in the description below for my reviews on horrorbuzz.com. If you're interested, please read them. I'm Chris Mytony. You can call me Mr. FLIXTER. And I just love talking motion pictures. Until next time, have a great day. Mr. FLIXTER. And remember, if you're a cinemaniac like me, make sure you like and subscribe down below.